Chapter 7 deals with government intervention in the marketplace. Two types of government intervention. One is when they set a price ceiling. This is when the government thinks the price is too high. So, for example, some buildings that are rent control. And the other is a price floor. There are two types of price floors. One is in the labor market, and that would be minimum wage. And the other is in the agricultural market, and that particular type of price floor is actually called a price support. And both of these are keeping prices, if they're effective, above the equilibrium price. So with the price ceiling, start with the regular supply and demand curves. In order for a price ceiling to be effective, it must be set below the equilibrium price. So the government thinks the price is too high. It would be illegal if the government set a price that's above the price ceiling. So what happens here is you look at the intersection of the supply curve, the price ceiling, because the producers are only willing to produce up to that level, so they're going to underproduce because we're below the equilibrium quantity. You take your quantity and you go up to your demand curve. That's the maximum price consumers are willing to pay. Deadweight loss is the easy part. So the deadweight loss is going to be this region. So again, this is deadweight loss due to underproduction. These are desirable goods that from the social perspective we want to be produced, but they're not being produced because the suppliers are stopping here. The producer surplus is going to be this region, because you look at the price the producers, in this case the landlords, collecting versus the minimum price they're willing to sell at, which comes from the supply curve, so that's the producer surplus. Typically the consumer surplus would be from a point on the demand curve all the way down to that price ceiling, but due to something called resources loss, it's going to be much smaller than that. Consumer surplus, when you hit the demand curve and come across, so we go to the demand curve for the maximum price, and we come down to this price level, because some consumers are willing to pay up to this price level at this quantity. Then we have a black market that develops, and it's called resources loss, represented by this rectangle, and this is because consumers, potential renters, are willing to pay much higher than the price ceiling quantity, dollar amount. They're willing to pay up to this amount. So therefore, some landlords can illegally try to get extra money from the prospective renters. And as well, this increased search time. At this price, there are many, many more customers who are looking to rent, so they're willing to pay from the price ceiling all the way up to this point on the demand curve. Anytime a price ceiling was set above the equilibrium price, it would be ineffective. So if a price ceiling was set up here, that would be an ineffective price ceiling because the marketplace has already determined the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity. Now to get to the price floors. Once again, there are two types of price floors. One in the regular product market. So this would be the agricultural market, called a price support. And the price support, so agricultural market. In this instance, to be effective, the price is set above the equilibrium price. The government, at this price, quantity supplied is bigger than quantity demanded. So normally there'd be a surplus and price would fall. Well, the reason why the government wants this extra quantity to be produced, and the farmers only produce it if someone's going to buy that quantity, is because the government may need extra food in case of emergency, international disasters. So the quantity that's going to be produced is going to be over here. So I'm going to call it Q above because it's above the efficient equilibrium quantity. Well, this could be a portion of a subsidy that the government's going to have to pay. We'll call this Q1. The consumers hit the demand curve from the price support. The consumer's only going to buy up to Q1. So this rectangle represents the dollar amount that the consumers are going to spend. The difference between Q1 and Q above, as seen down here, this quantity represents the quantity the government must spend. So this rectangle represents the subsidy, the total subsidy, dollar amount, that the government must spend. And of course, subsidies come from taxpayers. So ultimately, we are paying for that. And this piece that I'm erasing right here, I'm going to go over it again. This part of the subsidy is the deadweight loss due to overproduction. Because once again, we'd stop at the equilibrium quantity, but these are goods where the cost is more than the benefit, so it's considered deadweight loss due to overproduction. And the last price floor is in a labor market. So in the labor market, we have a regular supply and demand. We're going to put D subscript L and S subscript L. So we'd have our y-axis would be a price, but it's a price of labor, so we'll call that minimum wage for unskilled workers. And we have the quantity of prospective employment, people looking for a job. If the government thinks the wage is too low to be effective, they set a price floor above. This is the minimum price the government can charge. You can only come down so far legally. Well, the government could hire the surplus workers and produce at a quantity above equilibrium, but that's not how the law is written. What happens to minimum wage? The government is only going to produce, the firms are only going to hire at this lower quantity. So as before, if we come and hit the other curve, in this case the supply of labor, and just don't forget supplier of labors, these are individuals or households, and those who demand labor are the businesses. So this is different than in a product market. This is a labor market. This rectangle is going to be resources lost again, because employers are making this higher salary, so therefore there are a lot more of them who are looking for work, more competition, so it takes people longer to get a job. But some employees may pay some wage illegally above the minimum wage, below the minimum wage, but above what the workers are looking to pay, so this amount. Up here, typically in a product market, we call this consumer surplus, but this is going to be a surplus to the firm, because the firm is willing to hire the maximum price they want to hire from the demand for labor curve, yet they only have to pay that amount. You would think typically the worker surplus would be the region below the minimum wage all the way to the supply of labor curve, but due to the increased search time and illegal activity where the employers are paying workers less than the minimum wage, it's reduced to this little triangular region in this case, and this we call the surplus for the employee.